he's so hungry, he just starts digging into the food, right? He's just all the bread and the dates, he's just going at it. And Umar ibn Khattab, he comments that usually when someone is not feeling well and they're hurt and they're sick, they don't usually eat much, right? They'll eat a little bit and they just want to rest and sleep. But Suhayb, he's just going in, he's just going at it, he's just eating everything, right? So the Prophet ﷺ, he asks him, Ya Suhayb, you're eating so much, but you don't look so well, and your eye is swollen. You're eating so much food, and so he looks at the Prophet and he says, Ya Rasulullah, I'm eating from the other eye. So he had a bit of a sense of humor, and that made the Prophet smile. So Suhayb's father, like we mentioned, was actually Arab. His name was Sinan, and he was actually a governor on behalf of the Persians. So even though he was Arab, right, because the Persians and the Romans, they had conquered some parts of the Arabian Peninsula. So some parts allied themselves with the Romans, some allied themselves with the Persians. So Sinan, he was a governor on behalf of the Persians. So Suhayb, he grows up in kind of a peculiar circumstance where he's an Arab kid, but he's living in the Persian lands, but he looked Roman because he had very white skin, which was unusual for people at that time. So it's kind of like confusing, right? So at that time, obviously, like I just mentioned, the two superpowers were the Romans and the Persians, and they were basically always at war with each other. So they would attack each other's lands. So what ends up happening is Suhayb's city is attacked by the Romans, and he ends up getting kidnapped by them and sold into slavery. So he was only 5 years old at the time. So he goes from living with the Persians to living with the Romans, right? So he's kind of all over the place. So he ends up in the land of the Romans, and he gets sold around from slave master to slave master, and he ends up living with the Romans for 20 years. And because he lived with the Romans for such a long time, he kind of adopts their language. He learns the Roman languages, and he kind of gets out of touch with his Arab roots. So he forgets Arabic, actually, because of how long he stayed there. So, but eventually what happens, he makes his way to Mecca. It's unclear exactly how he got out, but he gets away from the Romans, and he winds up in Mecca. And so why he was called Ar-Rumi is because he came from the Roman lands, and because he lived there so long, he always had kind of like an accent. So he would speak Arabic, but he didn't speak it that well. He had like a Roman accent, right? And on top of the fact that his skin was white, so he looked Roman, he sounded Roman, so they called him Ar-Rumi, even though he was born Arab. So he ends up in Mecca. He ends up under the guardianship of Abdullah ibn Judan. And Abdullah ibn Judan was not a Muslim. He died before Islam, but he was at that time the richest man in Mecca. He had a business. He would do trade, and so he makes Suhayb a partner of his. And from him, Suhayb, he learns how to do business and how to do trade. And Suhayb himself ends up becoming a very wealthy person because he had learned from Abdullah ibn Judan, and he also joined in the business. So he goes from being a slave to actually being very rich, right? He came to Mecca as a slave, but he ends up amassing a lot of wealth. But what ends up happening is Abdullah ibn Judan, he passes away, he dies. And the reason that's significant is because Suhayb is not originally from Mecca, he does not belong to any of the tribes of Mecca, right? And at that time, what tribe you belong to, it matters a lot. It's like really important, right? So because he didn't have a tribe, even though he was so rich, he was seen as low class in their society. He was seen as low class because all that matters is who your father is and what tribe you're from. So because he didn't have those things, and the only guardian he had was Abdullah ibn Judan, has died, he had no tribal backing and no tribal protection, right? So this is important for when he accepts Islam. So Suhayb he hears of this new religion of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so he decides to check it out for himself. Right? He wants to hear the message for himself. He knows the Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to be a honest and truthful person, so he decides he wants to hear the message for himself, see what this Islam is about. So he ends up going to the house of Arqam, Darul Arqam, and when he gets there, he runs into Ammar ibn Yasir at the door. And when he sees Ammar, they both kind of question each other, like, what are you here for? What are you here for? But they both realize that they're there for the same thing, right? That they're there to hear the message. So they enter the house, and they both end up accepting Islam that day. So oftentimes you'll see these few Sahaba, they're often connected and joined together. So you'll see Suhayb, Ammar, Bilal, Khabab. And the reason is these are people who the society at the time saw as very low class, but whom were very beloved to Allah. And Allah actually reveals ayat about these Sahaba as well. So remember that Suhayb, I mentioned earlier that he's one of the first 7 that did not hide their Islam. He wasn't shy at all about becoming Muslim. He was very public about it. But the problem is, like we mentioned, he doesn't belong to any tribe, right? So there's no one to protect him, there's no one to back him up. So this makes him a key target for Quraysh, because basically he's free game. Anyone that wants to attack Suhayb, anyone that wants to torture him, you can go ahead and do it, because no one is going to back him up and no one is going to protect him, right? Because he doesn't have any tribe. And that's exactly what happens. Him along with the others I mentioned, like Ammar and Bilal and Khabab, they all had to endure great torture at the hands of Quraysh because they accepted Islam and because they were public about their Islam. They were tortured for that. Then the time comes for Hijrah, right? And Suhayb, he also intends to make Hijrah, but he ends up getting blocked. He tries to go, but the Quraysh, they lock him up and they chain him up and they don't let him go, right? So they stop him from going. But Suhayb, he's quite intelligent. So what he had done was he had hidden and stashed away his wealth. So he hid his wealth because he knew that Quraysh is going to try and steal his wealth. So he hid it in secret places. And then one night, when the guards weren't really paying mind to him, he gets away and he escapes. And he starts making his way to Medina. But on his way to Medina, the pursuers, they catch up to him. They catch up to him, but he takes the high ground on a hill and he has his bow and arrows. And he tells them, look, you guys know I'm one of the best archers among you. So if you keep coming after me, I'm going to start shooting you all with my arrows. And they say to him that, Ya Suhayb, you came to Mecca as a slave. You came with nothing, you came as a nobody, and you became so rich under our watch. You amassed all this wealth under our watch, and now you think we're just going to let you get away just like that? So Suhayb, he realizes that all these people care about is the money, right? All they care about is the money. So he makes them a deal. He says, look, I'll make you a deal. I'll tell you everywhere that I hid all my wealth. I'll tell you where all my wealth is hidden, and you can go dig it up and you can have it all. But in return, you have to let me go and let me go to Medina. So they accept this deal, and he tells them where he hid his wealth, and then he leaves for Medina. So when he arrives in Medina, the Prophet ﷺ, he sees him approaching with nothing. He doesn't have a caravan, he doesn't have any goods, he doesn't have any of his wealth. He's coming completely empty-handed, and he looks sick, he looks tired. And the Prophet welcomes him and he says, Rabi al-Bay Abu Yahya, you won the trade. Your trade was successful, you won the trade. Because he traded all his wealth to be with the Prophet ﷺ, right? He gave it all up and he left everything behind. All the wealth that he accumulated, right? He started off as a slave and he accumulated all that wealth and he didn't hesitate at all to just leave it all behind and completely sacrifice it all for the sake of Allah, right? So it's kind of an important lesson there, like, what are we willing to give up? What are we willing to sacrifice? Because a lot of people aren't willing to give up anything, right? Like even in Ramadan, you'll see some people, they're fasting, but there's some things that they know they shouldn't be doing, but they still don't give it up, right? Even in the month of Ramadan, you see people, they can't even make those small sacrifices. Yet the Sahaba, when we look at the example of the Sahaba, they're willing to give up everything for the sake of Allah. I want to just fast forward to a later point in his life. In Medina, one day Abu Sufyan was visiting Medina on some business matters. He was to discuss some of the details of the treaty that the Muslims had with Quraysh. And he's sitting and some of the Sahaba are meeting with him. And the group I mentioned earlier is there as well, Suhayb, Bilal, Khabab, and them. And Suhayb, he speaks to Abu Sufyan harshly. He tells Abu Sufyan that the swords of Allah have not yet reached the throats of the enemies of Allah. So he says, doesn't have kind words for him. But Abu Bakr, he admonishes Suhayb. He says, basically tells Suhayb, like, calm down. Abu Sufyan is our guest, right? He's discussing important matters with us. Don't speak so harshly to him. Just like speak respectfully to him. And later on, Abu Bakr, he tells the Prophet about this. And the Prophet ﷺ, he says to Abu Bakr that anyone who upsets that man and those with him, referring to Suhayb and Bilal and Khabab and those Sahaba, anyone who upsets them, Allah is going to be upset with him. And upon hearing this, Abu Bakr, he begins to shake. because he doesn't want to upset Allah, right? So he immediately he rushes back to them and he tells them, did I upset you? If I did, please forgive me. And they said, of course, Abu Bakr, you did not upset us. But the reason I mentioned that is that look at how Allah honors the people that the society at the time didn't honor. Right? The society at that time saw them as nothing, as worth nothing, as low. But look at the honor that Allah and the izzah that Allah gives them, right? And the highlight there is that if Allah loves you, then what else really matters, right? Like, what else in the world matters if Allah loves you, right? If Allah holds you in high regard, then you don't need anything else. All that matters at the end of the day is your status and your rank in the eyes of Allah. And if we care about our status and our rank in the eyes of Allah, and we want to increase that, then shouldn't we try to increase that by pleasing Him, right? So we should remember what the point of this month was. We went through this entire month of Ramadan, and the point of this month was to gain taqwa, right? To gain taqwa, to gain piety, to gain that God consciousness, so that the main thing that we think about and the only thing that we really care about is Allah, right? Because nothing else matters at that point. Because if we center Allah, then He's going to take care of all the rest, right? So let's try our hardest to get the most out of these last few precious days that we have left of Ramadan. And may Allah allow us to see many more Ramadans. Wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.